بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين صلى الله وسلم على سيدنا رسول الله رحمة الله للعالمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to our brief introduction to the Islamic rational sciences with a focus on logic. It says chapter 3. This is the text that we use for a study guide. What we're going through now is a study guide that we use at my school. Again, support the efforts of independent, free educational institutions. You can sign up for $24 a month for you and your entire family. All of our classes live and our on-demand program, our certificated program also, by visiting www.suhailweb.com. If you can't do that, at least like, subscribe, leave a comment so we can overcome the algorithm issues. So now this is really where our course starts. Everything up until this point, chapter 1 and chapter 2 were introductions to the study of logic. We skipped, like, for example, going through the 10 mabadi and other things, but we covered that in our major class for this. Again, this is the introduction. But if we think about really what are the ingredients of logic, it's language and thought and language. This is like integral, this relationship between the two. And from the definitions that we shared, it is clear that this is the science that examines the laws of thought. Like grammar to speech, I've said it so many times, by which we distinguish thinking from faulty thinking. So correct thinking, from faulty thinking. Since Aristotle's time, logicians have considered dividing logical topics into 3 sections. So number 1 is conceptualization. We talked about it, tasawwarat. Surah is a picture with Sad. Mutasawwir is the idol maker in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Studying words, their significations and their types, then definitions and their types. Their significations is going to become extremely important. Dalalat, alaf, and the types of dalala, the types of significations are going to come up soon. Number 2 is what's called tasdiqat, affirmations, studying propositions, their types and their rules. And then finally, inference, istidlal, addressing arguments and types of proofs. Looking at the first section, we find that logicians have included the study of words as like their top priority, considering it intrinsic, right? It's like inseparable in its relationship to logic, because they recognize the strong connection between thought and language. Obviously, language is the means by which we express our thoughts, and it is the medium for transmitting thoughts from one person to another. How do we transmit our thoughts, correct thoughts, through language? It's not surprising then that logicians are concerned with studying words in terms of their signification of thought. What that means is dalala. So the word is a dalil, and what it indicates, what it signifies, is called dalala. You can also say dilala. There's a difference of opinion about which one of those is afsah, dilala or dalala. Not from other linguistic aspects such as grammar, morphology, rhetoric. They're not worried about that. They're worried about what does the word signify? What is its madlul? So you have the dalil, and then what it indicates is its madlul, and the process is that dalala of that dalil is directing you towards that madlul. And seeking that is called istidlal. Number 3 here. How do you assess it? How do you understand it? How do you engage it? It's not surprising then that they placed a lot of attention on that. Therefore, the logician in the science of Islamic logic is concerned primarily with thought, and secondarily with the words that indicate this thought. There's going to be some tweaking to that as we move on, but more or less. So here's some definitions of dalil and madlul, this relationship between something and what it signifies, a situation where knowledge of one thing necessitates knowledge of another thing. That's the definition of istidlal by Al-Qutb al-Razi. a situation where knowledge of one thing necessitates knowledge of another thing. So if you know that dalil, then you know it's madlul. Sheikh Muzaffar defined it as a situation where if you know of something's existence, your mind moves to the existence of something else. It's like smoke indicates fire. A scream indicates fear, potentially, or pain. A groan, someone's groaning, indicates someone's in pain. A cough may indicate someone's sick. Others define it as the relationship between two things where one indicates the other. These are all very similar definitions. They're both showing this contingency. So we're going to stop for a second to make sure you guys are with me. We're talking now about istidlal. We're not getting into the guts of it. We're just defining it and talking about it. Why? Because in our trip together, we're going to encounter certain type of dalil that are strictly the purview of the science. And those dalil are going to be used for istidlal, which lead to a madlul, which then lead to tasdiq or takzib, you affirm it or you deny. All right. The author of Mushd Salim, Sheikh Awadullah al-Hijazi, defines it as understanding one matter from another. So these two definitions, like, God bless them, but they're not jami', right? They're not giving you like a complete sort of image. They're a little bit too ambiguous. So these two, I would encourage you to sort of focus on. What can be observed in these definitions is that they all converge on one point, which is true, the necessary connection, that contingency that I talked about, or association between the signifier and the signified, the dalil and the madlul, such that if you know the signifier, the dalil, you would know the madlul. If you knew it correctly, you need to add that in there as a qualifier. For example, the word airplane, it's a word, it signifies something. So I don't even think now about the word dalil and think about like ayat from Quran and hadith of the Prophet. Now we're talking about in the context of words. That's going to come later on as we get more into the Islamic sciences. But right now we're at this, we're not in fiqh, we're not in usul fiqh, we're not in sharia, we're in mantiq. And in this subject, in this college, these words have a specific meaning. Just like in other disciplines, they have a specific meaning. So don't confuse it. Now you need to think within this way. And this is one of the major mistakes that students of knowledge make. They confuse disciplines when it comes to terminology and words. I remember one time I was in a class, we were reading al-Mughni of Imam Ibn Qudama in Dar al-Ifta. And I had just came back from summer break. I was here in the US, went back to Egypt, and the Sheikh was saying mutakallimin and mutakallimin. So I thought he meant the people of theology. And I was like, but like, why are we talking about these people? He was like, you forgot, we're talking about the context of usul al-fiqh. So usul al-fiqh, the mutakallimin are the Shafis, the Malikis, and the Hanbalis. So you can see there's an example of me making a mistake, a big mistake, based on using the wrong glossary for the wrong subject. So you have to be careful. Pay attention to this. If you're serious about your studies, you're going to understand what words go where and what definitions and applications belong where. The Suyuti says this about the criticism of Tasawwuf. He says, oftentimes people are criticizing the Sufis based on words, but they're using definitions from different sciences to assess the meanings that are housed in the college of Tasawwuf. He said, that's wrong. It's a mistake. So pay attention here. We're not talking about dalil like kitab wa sunnah, ijma', qiyas, istishab, istishal. We're talking now about what? About dalil according to this science of logic, the signifier and what it signifies. So the relationship between the signifier and the signified. Dalil and what's called madlul, maf'ul yani. For example, the word airplane indicates the massive structure that transports people from one place to another through the air. Similarly, if you see smoke, you would realize there is fire because smoke comes from fire. Also, if you hear someone groan, you would understand that that person is suffering from pain. In this way, what logicians call the signifying matter may be a word, a sound, or something from the world of objects, which they have termed dalil. And they have agreed to name the meanings that the signifier indicates. They call these, what it indicates is what? Madlul, the signified. In the Quran, everything in creation is ayah. And its madlul is al-Khaliq, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is Allah. There are types of signification that we want to pay attention to. Number one, mental signification, that was called ad-dalala al-aqaliyah. This is where reason determines the necessary connection between the signifier and the signifier, because what's going to make a correct thought is that nisba, is the relationship between the dalil and the madlul correct? Is it correct? So if you heard the sound of an airplane and you said, wow, a sick person's about to show up, that's incorrect. So this is where reason determines the necessary nisbah, relationship between the signifier and the signified, such that there is an inherent correlation between them in their external existence, outside of your mind, meaning al-wujud. An example is the relationship between cause and effect. When an effect exists, reason, by its nature, judges that there must be a cause, due to the inherent correlation in their external existence. Where there's smoke, there's fire. If you take away oxygen, what happens to the fire? And so on. This type is further divided into verbal mental signification, non-verbal mental signification. This is not really important for us right now. You can look at these definitions, you can engage them as you like, but this is not what we're worrying about now. The second type of signification is ad-dalala al-tabi'iyah. It's related to our nature. So like we hear someone groaning, we think they're sick, put on a sweater, it's cold outside. This is related to adat. Again, this is not really what we want to focus on. I don't want you to get lost here. A lot of times, I'm actually not in favor of even doing this with people, but it's here, so I'm alluding to it, but I usually just jump to here because the only thing you need to worry about in the context now of the Islamic rational sciences is this under the third category. So this is good just to help you sort of course, you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to understand, you want to have broad knowledge, but not in the beginning, right? In the beginning, we want to get to the main course, if you will. So the third conventional signification, ad-dalala al-wada'iyah. Al-wada'iyah means it's placed. Now you can appreciate why al-ajurumi says bi-wad'i al-arabi. This is the relationship that arises between the signifier and the signified due to convention. It means people are going to be expressing themselves with words and their meanings. It is divided into two. What concerns us is the first. The signification of words on their meanings, where the connection between the word and its meaning is not due to reason or nature, but rather linguistic convention, usage, meaning that people agree that this specific word indicates this specific meaning. This is what we're going to be focusing on. In short, the relationship between words and their meanings as they are used by people. The difference between And then he talks here about the differences. You can check them out, but it's nice to know the difference between mental and natural signification is that the correlation between the signifier and the signified is natural. It's not necessarily rational. So you can see the first, like, is related, the connection is due to like rational issues. The second is like related to natural issues. What we're worried about now is the usage of words and their meanings. So here there's a chart, a little bit off right here, it needs to be right here, but you can see types of signification, ad-dalala. And that's what we can see now when people, what's the dalil? People are arguing about dalil fighting. And man, it's a very complex topic, right? I've always found it interesting that people will get like upset about the study of the Islamic rational sciences, but they use the word dalil. You can ask them like, where did that word come from? Ad-dalil. Dalil is coming from Aristotle. Cleaned up, pressed, ironed out, and sanitized by ulama. So it's like using the word dalil and that you're saying there's no mantiq in Islam. Well, then use a different word. So here we see a dalala and its types, verbal, nonverbal. Within our focus, we're taking verbal, conventional, meaning its usage. Wada'iyya. Dalalatul wada'iyya. Dalalatu wada'iyya, which is related to laf. So ad-dalala, lafziyya, wada'iyya. The rest we're not concerned with. And here we start to see how Islam is breaking away from the Greeks and breaking away from others in certain areas. Here I need you to pay attention to this because this comes up a lot even in books of usul al-fiqh and some books of kalam. Although at an application level, you'll get that when you read those books, but you just want to remember this. This is important. If verbal convention signifies, if verbal conventional signification is the important type in logic that we're focusing on, right? Verbal, conventional, means spoken, signification, dalala. Then that is divided into three parts. So that's why I said just focus on this a lot. We took a lot here, right? So what you want to do is say, okay, when it comes to dalala, there's different types of dalala, khalas mashi. Okay, but what I need to focus on is a dalalatul wada'iyya, al-lafziyya. That's what I need to focus on, which is wada'iyya. These three, ad-dalala, lafziyya, not ziyya, wada'iyya, these three things. Boom. And so when it comes to that, there are three types of signifiers. Number one is what's called mutabaqa, or mutabaqiyya, ad-dalala, al-mutabiqiyya. Tibaq means to stack on top of each other, right? Surah Nuh, tibaqa. You see, like the heavens look like they're stacked on top of each other. Tabaqa is a plate you eat from. So here, what it means is this is that the word, what it signifies, it signifies the entire meaning for what it was established. So this applies when the meaning is composed of parts and all parts together are intended. So the particulars and the universals, we'll talk about this later. For example, the word human, which signifies a rational animal. It's called correspondence because mutabaqa, the signifying word matches the meaning and equals it. So if you say al-insan, al-hayawan, natiq, those two words fit perfectly together. Like Allah and ma'bud, Allah and the one worshipped, fit together perfect. Number two was called dalalatu at-tadammuniyya with dad. This is the word's signification on part of the meaning for which it was established. So for example, if you say human, signifying only rational, you say rational animal. We're mammals, right? So al-insan, you said hayawan. So here insan, it means a rational animal. But if you only say rational, you're not using all of what's found in that word human. So you're using part of that. That's tadamuniya, yani juz. So this is kul, this is ba'd. Ad-dalalatul ba'diyya, ad-dalalatul kulliyya. We don't use that because it's going to confuse you with other terminology later on. But you just want to remember this. The signification is also called inclusion because it's about understanding the part from the whole. That relationship is very important. A part, an ingredient of the whole thing. Finally, what's called ad-dalala al-tizamiyya. Al-tizamiyya. This is the word signification on something external. Iltizam means you are forced to find it externally, outside of its meaning that it was established for. But this external matter is necessarily tied to the meaning. For example, the word for signifying an even number, or the limit of marriage. Well, these meanings are not what for was established to indicate. It indicates it, right? Iltizamiyya, iltizaman, because of that external relationship. So you need to remember this. And this one, of course, needs practice. It may be hard to imagine. But here, ad-dalalatul mutabaqa, sahla. Ad-dalalatul tadammuniyya, sahla. Ad-dalalatul iltizamiyya, أصعب من هذه الثلاثة. It's the most difficult one. Here's some examples of what we talked about earlier. But I want to go here because the only thing I need you to remember is this conventional verbal. Here's ad-dalalatul mutabaqa, the word human indicating a rational animal. Word matches its complete established meaning. The word human indicating only rational, not animal. Ad-dalalatul tadammuniyya, afwan. Word indicates part of its established meaning. Tadammun yani juz. The word for indicating an even number. Word indicates something necessarily associated with its meaning. So depending on context, like if you're in some like marriage group and someone says four, immediately people's minds are going to go external from the number and think you're talking about a ta'addud. If you say five, right, people might think about salah. After Isha, if you said to someone one, they may think you're talking about salat witr. But the word one doesn't mean witr. You have to pay attention. Literally, the word four, the word five, the word one, they don't mean what they're indicating. هذا التزامية. Here's some questions for you to think about. And again, some of this we have to practice in the future. Remember, this is just an introduction. So what you want to take from this is, okay, there's these different type of significations. The one I need to focus on is dalalatu lafziyya al-wada'iyya, that conventional verbal signifier, which is divided, which is lafziyya, right, spoken, which is divided into three: mutabaqa, tadammuniyya, and iltizamiyya. Mutabaqa is dealing with the word and its meaning are 100% aligned. Tadammuniyya, the word and its meaning are somewhat off. Only part of what the word signifies is being mentioned. And then ad-dalalatu iltizamiyya, the word and what it signifies, its madlul is it's completely out of the sort of limit of that word. So which type of signification is the primary focus of logical studies? You should be able to answer that question now. Then I'm going to ask you, what are the types of verbal conventional signification with examples? You should be able to tell me. If I ask you what's the difference between those three, you should be able to tell me. If I should ask you why is it iltizamiya, why is it called that? You should be able to tell me. Why is it called tadammuniya? Why? You should be able to tell me that. Mutabaqa, you should be able to tell me that at this juncture. Before you continue, you need to be able to answer those questions. Let's talk quickly about practical applications of this. So, the relevance of Islamic logic for today. The study of Islamic logic continues to have significant relevance in contemporary Islamic studies and thought, especially in the academy, what we say is the Eastern Academy, the Ancient Academy, but even the contemporary academy within the Muslim world. Understanding the nuanced approach to signification and reasoning can enhance your ability to interpret classical Islamic texts more accurately. Absolutely. Most of the books of Usul al-Fiqh are written in this way. Develop sound arguments in Islamic legal reasoning. So if you're asked to write, it's very obvious when you're reading someone's fatwa online if they have been exposed to this or not. Identify logical fallacies in contemporary discourse. You can use this even in da'wah. Bridge Islamic intellectual traditions with certain contemporary academic disciplines. So this sophisticated semantic theory, what we're talking about now, developed within Islamic logic. And I want you to understand that the manatiqah of Islam, those scholars of this science, what you just went through, I'm giving you like the icing on this cake, right? But they did a lot to develop this framework that we're applying now, because this framework is going to become extremely important in writing, in reading, and even defending. If someone wants to go down this path, if they don't want to go down that path, right? No one's forcing you. Right? You don't have to. But there's certain schools, certain dojos, and unfortunately, this is people are not trained like they used to be trained to write like this, to defend like this, to think like this, which is concerning. Colonized community has to hold on to what its legacy is. So the Islamic logic offers a framework for understanding how language conveys meaning that complements modern linguistic and philosophical approaches absolutely and preserves the independence of our pre-modern, pre-industrial age academic canon. Make sure also you're explaining classical text correctly. Here's an example. We can apply signification theory to text interpretation. So what you just learned is the Islamic signification theory related to the science of Islamic logic in a very brief way. You have this very important verbal conventional signification that's divided into three, a whole, apart, or external, by its imperative, it's essential. All right. So here, some applications we can think about. Consider the verse of the Quran, those who consume interest cannot stand on the day of resurrection except as one stands who is being beaten by Satan into insanity. Using our understanding of types of signification. What do we take from this? Correspondence, signification, the direct prohibition of consuming interest, riba, and its consequences. Inclusion, signification. This is tadammuniya. So correspondence is mutabaqa. Inclusion is tadammuniya. I don't like the word commitment, signification. It's an interesting translation, but iltizamiya means like it's lazim. So if you think about like it matching 100%, this is a clear prohibition of consuming interest with this consequence. Number two, the specific act of engaging in interest-based transactions is prohibited. Number three, commitment signification. The verse indicates the gravity of the sin of dealing with interest by comparing those who engage in it to someone possessed, which implies the severe spiritual harm of this practice. Doesn't say it, but into insanity? Someone's possessed by shaitan. So here we see, and of course this may be hard for you now, how there's a layered understanding that's going to help jurists, based on the frame I just showed you, to derive both the explicit and underlying principles from the text. Now, if you understand what I just said, mashallah, man, you're on your way. Don't get caught up in the ingredients of the sauce yet. I just want you to be sort of amazed by what you're seeing. And that is that when you take that signification theory, if you're a trained jurist, then you can start to look at verses in hadith in three different sort of layers. دلالة مطابقة, دلالة تضمنية, دلالة التزامية, and now you're having these layers to meaning. Now we can appreciate the great effort of scholars and the schools that accompany those scholars and the engagement and passionate, intimate connection to the texts. And of course, you find other books where they give you dalil for the Sahaba did this, the Salaf did this, although they may not have had these terms. Okay? Within the contemporary setting, modern Islamic scholars, excuse the word, contemporary Islamic scholars continue to utilize some of them, logical frameworks derived from the Islamic rational tradition when addressing contemporary issues, for example, bioethical questions. When examining issues like organ transplantation or genetic engineering, scholars are going to apply logical principles to extend classical rulings to new situations. Qiyas, analogy, as we'll talk about in the future. What's the difference between qiyas mantaqi, qiyas usuli? Media and technology, evaluating the proper use of social media and technology through logical frameworks derived from Islamic ethical principles. So one of the reasons that you find a lack of discourse on modern issues, and I say this with respect, is that many people have not been properly trained in this. And this is by no means an attack on anyone. This is an encouragement for all of us, myself included, to improve. Because oftentimes now what happens, if you have people trained in these things and they're trying to teach or talk, because ignorance is the default, knowledge is located as ignorance. Abu Ala says, فَلَمَّا رَأَيْتُ جَهْلَ فَاشًا تَعْلَمْتُ حَتَّى يَقَالُوا إِنَّنِي جَاهِلُ. Abu Ala al-Ma'ari said, when I saw that ignorance had permeated, I learned until everyone called me ignorant. Meaning, if ignorance was popular and people called me ignorant because ignorance was popular, it must have meant I knew something. Financial innovations. Islamic finance relies on logical analysis to determine whether modern financial instruments and institutions conform to principles prohibiting interest and excessive uncertainty. And of course, related to, I don't like the word interfaith, I would just say religious dialogue, using logical frameworks to find common ground between Islamic teachings and other faith traditions. And I would say this applies to politics, activism, everything, while maintaining theological integrity. Of course, it's not for everybody. That's why there needs to be scholars in every city that people can educate, but also can engage with and ask about these things. It's very important. So now we see how these frames are not only going to apply to the sacred text and providing that layering, but in issues of ijtihad. And I want to say something. In the absence of an Islamic state that is functioning with a Sharia court, the need for this becomes greater, because in the presence of the absence of an actual physical model, the abstract sort of fills in where that physical model would be. And pay attention to what I just said. This becomes even more important because if you think about it, within the Muslim world, where is this kind of work happening in a way that can be comparable to, say, other universities and even other religions in what they're doing? And this is not an attack on us. This is just where we are, man. We have to be honest about our situation. Our tasawwur can't be wrong. And so in the absence of that state practice that's funding and financing and putting this at the forefront, Islam and the Sharia at the forefront of its decision making, has regulated, in the name of secularism and secular morality, religion just to a few areas like marriage and inheritance. And in other places, religion is something which is left to the imagination. And when something is left to the imagination, people are going to make mistakes in how they think. So the science that guides and directs thinking in a time like that is super important. So consider the following examples and identify the type of signification that's happening. You can write it in the comments box. If you're a Swiss student, this will be an assignment that you have to send to me. Hearing the adhan, call to prayer, and recognizing it's time for prayer. What kind of dalala is that? We know it's dalala, lafziya, wada'iyya. Khalas. You don't have to tell me that. But those three that we talked about earlier, mutabaqa, tudmaniyya, and iltizamiyya, you have to tell me which one. Seeing tears in someone's eyes and understanding they are sad. Now you're going to go outside of dalalat al-wada'iyya lafziya, okay? Understand that the word fasting refers to abstaining from food, drink, and other physical needs from dawn to sunset. When someone says roof, and you understand not just the top covering of a building, but also that it must be supported by walls. That must be is key in the phrase, right? Think about the dalala, which implies a must. A red traffic light indicating the drivers must stop. Some discussion questions, you can screenshot them if you want to do them on your own. And again, some more. Why we put so many drills and so many questions on this? Because, again, man, you got to practice this stuff. You got to think about it. You got to think through it. You got to work through it. It's a process, kind of sludging along, right? So when the word house is used to specifically refer to the walls of a house, not including the roof or foundation, same question is here. And finally, here's the course review and assessment that you want to take from these lessons. The historical development, talked about. Semantic theory, talked about scholarly perspectives after historical development. Then we talked about semantic theory. And then we talked about practical applications for each of these sciences. And then here is your final assessment that if you were a student at our school, you would take these 8 questions and you would submit them here. Again, you can enroll. Visit www.suhaybot.com. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase us in khair. Barakallahu feekum. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.